Good morning, Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf of Bava Basra 28. And with this daf, we begin a new chapter of Bava Basra. And this is the third chapter. It's called Cheska Sabat. And we're talking about a chazaka on a house or other items that a person is in the ownership of. Now, the word chazaka throughout the Shas can mean a few different things. It could be a chazaka as in a proprietary act that you do something to demonstrate that you own something. For example, building a fence around the property that demonstrates that you own that property, you've taken possession of it. Or it can mean a chazaka, as in that you have taken a hold of something. So, for example, you grab a hold of a talus. That's a chazaka that the talus is yours. But in our case, it's being a proof of something. Not it's where we want to talk about how you can bring a proof that something is going to be considered to be yours. And how do we do such a proof? How do we do such a proof? So that's what our Gemara is talking about, the chazaka, the proof that something is in your possession. So the Mishnah tells us cheskas habatim. So when it comes to trying to bring a proof that the houses are in your possession, the boros and the shich and the ditches or the ma'aros or the caves, we're on 28a. The shofos, these are the dovecotes or the merchatzos, the bathhouses, the beis abad, and the alpresses, beis hashlochim. These are the fields that are basically that they're irrigated fields, the avodim, the servants, v'kol shu osa peres tadir, anything that's constantly making fruit, chazkas and shaloshana miyom miyom. The chazaka that you own it, that is 3 years, and it's a continuous use of the product. So basically, I'm going to give everybody a little bit of an introduction because this will become clearer throughout the Gemara, but otherwise you might be a little lost. So first of all, this is a classic chapter, and if we were studying in depth, we could spend a month just on this first page. But the idea is that a person is living on a property for 3 years, and now another person comes with a contract that 4 years ago he says, I have this contract, and this contract says this land is mine. Reuven says this land is mine, but Shimon's been living there for 3 years. So since Shimon has been living there for 3 years, and also because the Gemara is going to make clear that he makes a claim that somebody sold it to him or gave it to him. So since he has the idea that he's been living there for 3 years, that's a proof. That's standing in the place of witnesses, so to speak. And so therefore, this idea that he's been there for 3 years is going to be enough with his claim to override the contract, the deed that the other person has. Gemara is going to say on Daf Chav Tes, because there's the assumption that the person won't keep his contract for more than 3 years. They're not going to make him keep his deed for longer than 3 years. Ramban explains that really, if the person really after 1 day, that the person should have objected after 1 day. And so really, if the person, let's say Reuben says he sees Shimon using his field, why does he say he's up to 3 years to object? It should be really after 1 day. If I saw somebody in my house and just start moving his furniture into my house, after 1 day I would have objected. So why do we give this guy 3 years? Because the person who was living there for the first 3 years, he's something wrong with his claim. What's wrong with his claim is that why doesn't he have a document stating that it's his? So therefore they both have competing defects in their claims. But it's after 3 years, he doesn't have anything wrong with his claim anymore because he's not supposed to keep, he's not required, it's not the norm to keep his contract to keep his deed for more than 3 years. So therefore, after 3 years, he's going to himself have an issue and he has a problem. So this is just some basic background understanding of how this is working. The other thing I wanted to mention is I was thinking about this as I was writing the Torah this morning, and I was writing in the Torah the passage of the first mitzvah, Chodesh Hazeh Lachem, It's mitzvah. By the way, if you guys are a little hot, we could put on the air conditioning. Are you a little hot? Uh, so there's the idea that you have to put the ot alabatim. You have to put a sign on your houses from in order to make sure that we know that it's the Paschal Lamb. So this idea, you have to put a sign on your homes. You can also read this idea of cheskas abatim. How do you make sure that you strengthen your house? It's shalosh shanim. That the cheska, that the strengthening of the house begins at 3 years. That's when the mitzvah of chinuch starts, and it's miyom liyom. It's a constant effort. The process of educating our children is a constant effort every single day, and 3 years is the time when we're supposed to start educating our child religiously. So let's go back to the Mishnah, Chav Ches Amud Aleph. Hold on one second. Just 1 second. Okay, so back to the beginning of our Mishnah, Cheskas Abatim, how do you have a proof that a house is yours? And the boros and the pits and the shichamaros, these are different types of pits, and the shofos, the dovecotes, and the merchatzos and the bathhouses, Beis Abadim, the olive press, the Beis Hashlochim. This is the irrigated field and the avadim and the slaves. Kol shu osa peris tadir. We're talking about anything that is constantly producing its fruit. It's constantly in use. And cheskas and shaloshana miyom liyom. If you've been using these for 3 years on a regular basis, yom liyom means every day, but it can't mean 24 hours a day, as we'll see from the Gemara. Then after 3 years, you're not required to have any other proof other than the fact that you had it for 3 years and the other person didn't object. Stay about. So let's say you have a field that is irrigated by rain, and so therefore, for that reason, it only makes its fruits once a year. There, you don't have to be using it every day because that's some type of field that you use every day. So therefore, the presumptive proof is after 3 years, but it's not every single day. Rabbi Shmuel's position is Gimel Chadashim Berishona. At the end, and the first 3 months, first year you only need 3 months, and Gimel Ba'achrona, and then you need 3 months at the end. Ushnei Masar Chodesh Be'emtza, and that's 12 months in the middle. Haray Yud Ches Chodesh. That's 18 months. Rabbi Shmuel's other position, you don't need 3 years, you need 3 seasons, and that's the end of the year, 3 months, because you basically need to be using it, and the other person not object in order to prove that it was yours. That's the end of the first year, 3 months, the beginning of the last year, 3 months. And then, okay, yeah, we're on the top of 28A. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining us. So, okay, so then the middle is 12 months. Rabbi Kiva says, Chodesh Berishona, Chodesh Ba'achrona, V'yud Beis Chodesh Be'emtza. Rabbi Kiva says you just need 1 month at the end of the first year, 1 month at the beginning of the last year, and 12 months in the middle. That's Haray Yud Daled Chodesh, 14 months. The Gemara is going to have to discuss in depth the positions of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shmuel qualifies this, but Medvar Mamurim B'stei Lavan. When do we say this idea that you need to have 18 months if it was a field that all of its fruits are collected in one season? Basically, at the end of the 3 months, the beginning of the 3 months, Aval B'stei Ilan. But if it's a field of trees and then the fruits are harvested at different times in the year, kanas est tfuaso, then you gather in the tvua here doesn't mean the wheat, which it typically means, but it means the grapevines. Masak es zeisav, and you crush the olives. Kanas es kaitzo, or you bring in the figs, and you do all 3 of these things. That's as a chazaka as though it's 3 years. Harei il gimel shana, meaning to say that the person would have objected. The whole idea is that if a person sees that you're using his field for three seasons and you don't object, and he doesn't object, the indication that it's yours. Bearing in mind what we said about the Ramban, because after that period of time, you lose your defect, which was you should have held on to the contract. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shamati mehochai Usha. Rabbi Yochanan says, I heard from those who were in Usha. Okay, this is a powerful phrase. First of all, who is Usha? Rashi says, he says, I heard from those who went to Usha. The Sanhedrin went to Usha, as it says in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, that there were 10 exiles that the Sanhedrin was exiled to, and one of them was they went from Yavne to Usha. But how could Rabbi Yochanan have heard from them because Rabbi Yochanan was much later than that. He was several generations after that. So some say this was a different Rabbi Yochanan, but anyway, I just point it out. But I also want to point out that this Gemara, which is Chazkas Abatim, where do we learn this halacha from? From the sages who were exiled into Usha, meaning to say, from one of the lowest points, the Sanhedrin was exiled, but yet here today we're studying their teachings. So those who were in exile in Usha, they taught Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan told us. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Shayu omrim minayla chazaka gimel shanim." How do we know that this proof is? You have a question, Ar? How do we know that this proof is established after you've been there for 3 years? How do we know that's what it takes to establish a proof? And as the Gemara does, as only the Gemara can do this, the Gemara says we learn it out from a shor hamuad. We learn it out from an ox that has been designated as a muad, meaning to say, as we remember from the beginning of Bava Kama, that before an ox scores 3 times, it's called a tam, and it pays half damages. But once it scores 3 times, it's called a muad. And so we see that 3 times establishes an ox as a muad, that it's foreseeable, and then we make it pay full damages. Ma'ashor muad, just like an ox, it's a muad. Kivan shenagach gimel negichos, once it has gored 3 times. Just like an ox, once it's gored 3 times, it has departed from the presumptive status of being a shor tam, and now it's what's called a shor muad. Once this field has been 3 years in a person's possession, we no longer assume the presumptive status is in the hands of the seller, even though he has a contract, or not a contract, a deed that it's his. After 3 years, he doesn't have it anymore, and it's now in the domain of the purchaser. So that's going to be the logic by comparing it to a shor muad. So Gemara is going to bring 4 questions about this. The Gemara says, first of all, the Gemara says there's a problem with that. The shor muad, after 3 times that the ox scores, we call it a muad, but up until the 4th time, it doesn't have to pay anything. Would you say also here, would you say also here, until the 4th time, we're going to say it's not his, meaning the shor muad, you only have to pay after the 4th time. Would you say until the 4th year, it's not going to be the person's? Gemara says no. First of all, that case is totally different. That's not a good comparison. In the case of the ox, once it's scored 3 times, then we're going to say it's a muad. The idach, and we're on top of 28b, and on the 4th goring that we require, kilo nagach. If he hasn't gored yet, then what's he going to pay? There's nothing to pay yet. That's because he hasn't gored yet. But but here, once he's been on the land for 3 years, it's going to be considered to be in his possession. So that's the first attempt to break down the comparison. The Gemara fends it off. So the Gemara says, well, what about the following? Ela me'ata, and this is something I alluded to before, chazaka she'ena imatana te'ave chazaka. We're going to get to this in the Mishnah on Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph, where we say that if the person, let's say Reuben says to Shimon, what are you doing in my field? He says, and he says to him, he says, listen, nobody said anything to me, I just went to the field. That's not, and I've been living here for 3 years. That's not enough. It's not enough to just say, I'm living here. And he didn't say you sold it to me or you gave it to me. If the chazaka doesn't have a claim associated with it, then we don't care about the chazaka. It's not enough to just live there for 3 years. You have to also claim that that you sold it to me. So if that's the case, the Gemara says, let's say this idea that we say in the Mishnah on Mem Aleph, chazaka she'en ima ta'ana, why do we say that's not sufficient? Tehave chazaka, that should be sufficient. And why do we say kol chazaka she'eni matana ena chazaka? Why do we say any claim, any time you're living there for 3 years without a claim, it's not considered to be a chazaka? time am I damrinon. So, meaning to say, that's the Gemara's answer. But the Gemara's question is, we should say that by 3 years, it goes out of the domain of the seller, just like a shor amud. Just after 3 years, after 3 times, it becomes a shor amud. So too, after 3 years, even without a claim, it should become out of the domain of the seller, whether or not the person claims he sold it to him. So the Gemara answers, no, time am I, what's the reason that we say that after 3 years, that it's in the domain it goes out of the first person's ownership and it's in the second person's ownership? Because we say, okay, after 3 years, we're going to maybe believe the second person. This one says I bought it from you, and this one says you stole it. And we don't know who's telling the truth. So after 3 years, we say, maybe this guy's telling the truth. But without a claim, how would we ever know? If without a claim that he bought it, the 3 years means nothing. So that's what the Gemara says. So it's like he said, no, if he doesn't make that claim, anan, we're not going to make the claim on his behalf. And so therefore, that the reason it's in his domain is basically learned from the chazak of the shor amud, where he's saying only if he makes the claim will we make the claim on his behalf. So now the Gemara brings a third objection. The third objection is also like what we're going to learn about from on Daf Lamed Ches, where we say, yes, Harold.
Why not have a concept of no year after no impact? It was abandoned. Much like pointing.
You mean saying that he declared it ownerless? It was Hefker.
Yeah.
That's
I'm just trying to. It's month or so we did something to livestock, and you have to try to return it.
So, meaning to say, we assume that the person is saying that if he didn't touch the property for all these years, we assume that he made it ownerless.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll see more on that as we study the chapter. We'll go through the logic about it. So the Gemara says, but now we have another question. Maskefar Rav Avira, because we're going to say that on Daf Lamed Ches that when he makes the objection within those 3 years, he doesn't have to make the objection right in front of the person. Let's say he did it in front of witnesses. Let's say Reuven, who has the deed, he said, "Oh, this guy's on my property." He doesn't have to say it to Shimon directly. He could just say it in front of witnesses, and that's going to be sufficient. So, that shouldn't be sufficient. Because we should say it should be like the case of the ox that gores, because, as Rashi says, that if you testify that the ox gores, and if they don't testify in front of the owner, it's not going to become a muad. And so here too, it shouldn't be sufficient if he makes the claim not in front of the person who's squatting. And so we should require it to be in front of him. It shouldn't be sufficient if the objection is not made in front of him. Just like with this ox that gores, we require the testimony about the ox to be in front of the owner. We should also require it in this case. Mar says no. With respect to the shor amuad, the reason why it needs to be in front of the owner is Hasam v'hua b'balav ksiv. It's a verse, meaning to say, yeah, sure, we learned the 3 years from the 3 gorings, but we can't learn the case of the objection from the way in which it becomes a shor amuad, because there you want to make him pay money. Rashi says there. In that case, since in that case, every time he becomes one of the times that he gores, you want to make him pay, and so therefore we require it to be done in front of witnesses, and they know how to investigate the witnesses. But here, the reason for the objection is to warn the person to keep a hold that he's coming to make a claim for the contract. And so therefore, since it's not to make him pay money for those times, it's just to make him warn him to keep hold of his contract. It doesn't need to be in front of him because, as we say, in this case, Hasan if they're in the case of the owner of the muad, basically it's only with testimony because you're coming to make him pay money, and so therefore it needs to be specifically in front of owners so that they can try to contradict the witnesses. But here, the reason why he raises an objection is not to get money from this person. It's just to warn him to guard his contract. And if that's the case, no matter where he makes it, chaver islay, v'chaver the chaver islay. We know that each one has a friend, and the word is going to get out about the friend. So the Gemara is going to now give a fourth objection about the comparison to a shor muad. Or Rabbi Meir the Amar. According to the position of Rabbi Meir, he says, Richek negichosav chayav, kirv negichosav will kol shekain. This is a dispute which we had in Bava Kama, where Rabbi Meir's position, where there's a dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that the three gorings, in order to establish them as a shor muad, have to be on 3 separate days. Rabbi Meir says, no, if it happens on 3 separate days, if that's sufficient to establish you as a gor, for sure, if it happens on 1 day, that the ox should be established as a goring ox. Rabbi Meir says, if it's distanced over 3 days, that disqualifies him as a shor muad. For sure, if it's over 1 day. So if that's the case, according to that logic, let's say you consume 3 different fruits on 1 day. Let's say, like a fig, it could go into like the fig gets ripe at different points in the day. So if that's the case, so then it should be established as a chazaka. You shouldn't, not all the figs ripen at the same time, and so therefore you shouldn't require 3 years. You just require even 1 day to establish it, like Rabbi Meir. Meir says, no, dumya deshor muad. No, the comparison has to be to the ox that gores. How so? Mashor muad. Just like a shor muad, when you did the first goring, the second goring was not yet in existence at all. So too, so too, when you come to consume 1 fruit in order to establish it as part of your years of chazaka, the second fruit can't yet be in existence. Where it says, wait 1 second. Well, if that's the case, let's say you eat the 3 fruits in 3 separate days, could go in slough, like a berry, a caper bush, that when you eat the first fruit, the second fruit is nowhere close to being ripe yet. Well, then you should be able to establish the chazaka after 3 days, like have a chazaka. So the Gemara says, no, hasam peirim miya isa. There, even though the caper bush is not close to being ripe, it's still in existence, and then it changes over the next day. Peira iso umigmar hu de kagamar. It just basically becomes kagamar va'azal, and over 3 days it completes its ripening. So the Gemara says, well, I'll give you a different way. Acha tlasa peri b'tlasa yam, and let's say you eat the 3 fruits over 30 days. Kigona spasta. Right, this is the animal fodder that it grows, and then you cut it down a little bit, and then within 30 days you'll eat it 3 times because you'll have 3 separate harvests within 30 days. So that should be enough to establish a chazaka. You shouldn't require 3 years. So the Gemara says, no. How does it work with the aspasta? Hey, chidami, how does it work with the aspasta? It's the kadiach va'acha, the kadiach va'acha. It's you let it grow up, and then you cut it down and you shave it. And so basically it's there in existence all the time. Also, he's not waiting until the fruit completely grows. He's just letting it grow and cutting it down, letting it grow and cutting it down. So it's there the whole time. So it's not like the shor muad. So the Gemara says, well, 1 second. Let's say you eat the 3 fruits over 3 months. Going as pasta. Let's say you let it grow the full 30 days, cut it down, let it grow the full 30 days and cut it down, let it grow the full 30 days and cut it down. Well, that should be a chazaka. You shouldn't require 3 years. So the Gemara says, yeah, you're right. Who is the Hochei Usha who say that it's comparable to the Shor Muad? This is the Hochei Usha are really one and the same as Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Shmuel Hachinami, and indeed Rabbi Shmuel doesn't require the chazaka of 3 years. It requires the use of 3 times, and it can be done even in just 3 months in this manner. Now Rabbi Shmuel Omer B'Medvar Mamurim B'Stei Alavan. And when does Rabbi Shmuel say his position? That it requires 3 years. When is this the case that you require 3 years in a field that basically produces it once a year? Once a year it produces its fruits. But an orchard where the trees are always producing fruits on an ongoing basis. Once it's established 3 different harvests, that's already the equivalent of a chazaka. So the Gemara said, we'll just do this very briefly. Rabbanan Mai. So according to the Rabbanan, who say that you require 3 years, what's their source for the chazaka of 3 years? So Amar Rav Yosef, they're going to base this on a verse from Jeremiah, which says, Sados bakesef yiknu v'kasov v'sefer v'chasom. Jeremiah told everybody to write, keep their contracts and write it down. And we're going to get into what Jeremiah's argument was, but that'll be tomorrow's daf. I want to say a word that tonight we're going to study the stuff again at 8 o'clock this morning, but then tonight's stuff will be at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock because of the fasting. A big